All I want for Christmas is for Marvel Studios to slow down the assembly line. Do we really need 5 shows and 2 holiday specials within the span of a little over a year? I have so much on my plate right now that I can't even enjoy the meal because I'm overwhelmed by the idea of how I'm actually going to consume it. Marvel content sometimes feels like the dessert course. Sugar rush filmmaking. Overly saccharine, not entirely necessary. The only Marvel film I've watched from Phase 4 is The Multiverse of Madness, a movie with no plot that I actually had fun with, but I can't bring myself to catch up with the rest, as no Marvel film has ever been my favorite film of any given year. The MCU is like a soap opera that never ends. The story just keeps going on and on, in an endless time loop, and eventually you have to watch over a decade's worth of content in order to understand and appreciate what's going on. Comic book material isn't always easily approachable because it can be hard to find an entry point. Picking up in the middle of a story arc is just going to be confusing. I felt it necessary to catch up on every new Marvel show that I haven't seen because I'm a completionist and a masochist. Welcome to my Disney Plus Marvel Studios streaming BINGE-A-THON holiday special. Someone get me a bucket, I think I'm gonna be sick. The best thing about the Guardians of the Galaxy holiday special is that it's 40 minutes and not 4 hours. It doesn't feel like a lot of money or effort was put towards this. The acting is really over the top and phoned in, but it's intentional. It's both paying homage to and poking fun at the idea of the Christmas special. One of the scenes was just Drax and Mantis hanging out with some Marvel cosplayers and taking pictures. Though the Guardians of the Galaxy holiday special feels like it was thrown together as an afterthought, I actually kind of enjoyed it. It's cheesy with a bunch of pop-punk Christmas songs, bookended by A Fairy Tale in New York by the Pogues. A W for James Gunn with the soundtrack choice. I wonder if the people at Disney have ever read the actual lyrics to this song. We even get Kevin Bacon singing a Christmas song with a band full of aliens.
Kevin Bacon, you have to pretend you're an actual hero or else Christmas is doomed.
There's a flashback where Yondu is being a Grinch, so Drax and Mantis decide to abduct Kevin Bacon and give him to Peter Quill for Christmas. This idea is actually taken from National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. To be honest, I didn't really find much of the humor with Drax or Mantis that funny, but it wasn't annoying me either. Though the Guardians films are some of my favorite Marvel movies, the humor of the MCU generally does nothing for me. It's either aimed at children, or it's just trying too hard to be funny. Sometimes it gets a light chuckle out of me, but the humor in Guardians works better for me than in other projects. The Guardians of the Galaxy holiday special has a careless charm, and would be a good choice to throw on when you've got your family around, so you don't have to talk to each other for 40 minutes. That's a joke. I love being around my family. The Guardians of the Galaxy holiday special gets a 7 out of 10 from me. Next! Let's talk about a Halloween special in the middle of a holiday special. We're moving backwards in time to Werewolf by Night, which is a delightful send-up to the classic Universal monster movies. It's shot in black and white, tells a story over a single night, and again, it's only 40 minutes long. A group of demon hunters are competing in a game where our nervous protagonist is actually a werewolf, and his best friend is a Lovecraftian creature named Man-Thing. The werewolf's name is Jack Russell. Marvel can be so corny. There's an odd scene where a guy's corpse is rigged up to appear as though he's talking, and he makes a really bad pun, but it's actually kind of funny in a Crypt Keeper kind of way.
I'll be rotting for you.
I had a good time with this one. It's atmospheric, has some fun gore near the end, and doesn't wear out its welcome with the length. There's not much in the way of character development. The hunters are all just fresh meat for Jack. It's a lot of build-up to the transformation and slaughter, but the mood is appropriate. It's at its most MCU when the characters are shooting magic beams at our protag. A large chunk of screen time in the middle is spent with Jack and a mysterious woman trapped in a crypt together, but there are some fun kills that make this appropriate for Halloween. Too bad I'm watching it for Christmas. I don't think every character needs a 4 to 5 hour series, but this could have been fleshed out into a short 90-minute movie and would have worked just as well. I'll go with a 7 out of 10 for Werewolf by Night. It's a step in the right direction after the release of one of Marvel's worst shows. Next! This is the big one, She-Hulk Attorney at Law, a show so controversial that it made a lot of ad revenue and clout for many YouTubers who put out video after video about how awful it was. There was a lot of copium being huffed when this came out by people who just wanted it to be good, so they wouldn't be on the side of the apoplectic rage bait community. This is a case where the writers anticipated for the angry review crowd to be outraged at the premise of the show, and spent too much of the story pushing back against would-be haters, rather than just ignoring the noise and making a good show. Yes, the CG in this show is terrible. It's so distracting that I actually enjoyed it more when it was just the character of Jen Walters. This is a CW level production. I mean that in the most insulting way possible. Before the show came out, the writers admitted they had no idea how to write courtroom scenes in a show called She-Hulk: Attorney at Law. They attempted to address the sloppy writing within the show by going meta, and having the character in the show comment on how bad it is. But that doesn't make it any better. The show ends with a group of red-pilled incels getting a Hulk serum, and their toxic male leader turns into a Hulk and gets in a fight with She-Hulk. Then she leaves the episode and accuses the writers of bad writing. So they knew it was bad and thought if they called themselves out on it, it would be funny enough to make us forget about how poorly designed the show was. It was billed as a sitcom, but it's not much of a sitcom because it's just not very funny.
Madison is with 2 N's, 1 Y, but it's not where you think.
Could you just spell it for us?
I think the inspiration for this show was Ally McBeal, which was a network show about a female lawyer that was popular in the late 90s. It also had terrible CG, but it's more excusable for that time. This is what passed for entertainment in the late 90s. No thanks, I'll just stick with the X-Files. She-Hulk is an episodic show without much direction. It relies heavily on comedic cameos from Tim Roth and Benedict Wong, and even references the fact that it relies too much on cameos. Remember Daredevil? Don't you want to see Daredevil and She-Hulk knock boots? This is the most pandering kind of fan service. The fourth wall-breaking meta-commentary from the source material wasn't integrated in a thoughtful way. It actually felt out of place when it did happen, because it was used rather infrequently. I just didn't think this show was funny or cute. I had to force myself to finish it just for bragging rights. Despite its attempt at creating a comic book show for feminists, She-Hulk: Attorney at Law actually sets the feminist cause back by about 40 years. The original She-Hulk comics were written for horny teenagers back in the 80s, but how am I supposed to jerk off to this? I'm giving She-Hulk: Attorney at Law a 3 out of 10. I'd read my She-Hulk comics instead if the pages weren't all stuck together. Next!
After any of the ends are switching identity.
You might think that because I have such an unfavorable opinion of She-Hulk that I will also instinctively hate Ms. Marvel as well, but this series actually stuck a better landing in my opinion. It's the story of a teenage Captain Marvel fangirl who gets to live out her dream of becoming a superhero, but it's a lot harder than she thought it would be. I'm not at all the target demographic for this show. I only watched it for the sake of this review. That being said, this is much better than anything you're going to get on the CW. Animation and live action are incorporated together in a playful way. The story focuses on the life of a Muslim American family and the dynamic of their beliefs and religious practices. Kamala's best friend in the show is basically Peter Parker. She's pretty much a female version of Peter Parker herself, a quirky science geek who gets superpowers. In addition to the friend-zoned Bruno, there's also the irresistible shirtless bad boy Kamran, and the masked vigilante Kareem, who belongs to a group called the Red Daggers. Of course, Kamran was only using Kamala to get close to her magic bangle. His mother leads a crew of genies from another dimension, who are obviously supervillains from the moment they show up on screen. It starts off low stakes enough, but by the time it came to its conclusion, it incorporated some wacky time travel nonsense, and then in the finale, all the characters fight off armed government agents with baseballs. It's so stupid and cartoonish that I actually kind of like it. This is a show for a younger audience, although we also see some characters get stripped of their flesh and turned into skeletons before they die, but it's still mostly on the lighter side. I'm actually going to give Ms. Marvel a 6 out of 10, just to be a contrarian. This was not a show I wanted to intake, but it went down smoother than I thought it would. It was nowhere near as aimless or preachy as She-Hulk, and it had better CG. Next.
Big Hulk and Little Hulk, Bada Hulk or Choti Hulk. Huh? So cute you all will look.
Oscar Isaac is a great actor, and in Moon Knight, he plays a man with split personalities, so he really gets to shine playing two different characters. One a meek, insecure historian, and the other a tough and hardened badass secret agent dude. A Disneyfied version of Egyptian mythology is incorporated into the character of Moon Knight, as he has a connection to the Egyptian moon god Khonshu, voiced brilliantly by F. Murray Abraham, in an appropriately over-the-top performance.
I can turn back the night sky.
Ethan Hawke is also great as the creepy cult leader villain. Along with the Black Phone, that's 2 Ethan Hawke heel turns in 1 year. There's a subtext about mental health, but it gets lost in all the Egyptian lore building. By the time the CG hippo was introduced, my score for the show was dropping, and in the final episode, the CG of the big bad alligator woman was so poor that the series was really crashing and burning for me. This character of a god should have just been portrayed as humanoid, not an ugly CG creature. It starts off strong with the mystery of the Mark Spector Stephen Grant character and the Moon Knight mantle, even though the action scenes are all kind of weak. As the show moves along, it's pushed into CW territory, which we've already established is a benchmark for bad television. Moon Knight is the series I'm most conflicted about because the cast is good, the story is told with care, and I personally enjoy the inclusion of Egyptian myth even if the CG is laughably bad by the end. Moon Knight sits in the 6 to 7 range, and I'm going to bump it up to 7 because despite my resting Grinch face, I'm not a complete Scrooge. Next. Hawkeye has never been one of my favorite Marvel characters. He's just a guy with a bow and arrow, which seems kind of boring when compared to the characters around him. So how do you take a C-tier Marvel character and create a series around them? Make it a Christmas show? They were probably looking at their release schedule and said, we need something for the holidays, so throw in some ornaments, a bunch of Christmas music, and have characters constantly telling each other Merry Christmas. Christmas show. Now, some people will argue that this is not a Christmas show, that it's just set during Christmas, and that's a whole online rabbit hole argument that we're gonna have to bypass for now. If we get into that discussion, we're gonna be here until Christmas. The setup is that Hawkeye is a sad dad mourning the loss of his partner Black Widow. They kept trying to sacrifice themselves, but she won out, and now he's just a worn-out guy with a hearing aid. Jeremy Renner seems kind of checked out in the role, but that's the way the character is written. He doesn't care anymore. Then a Marvel fangirl hijacks the show, and the main character is sidelined as it becomes about a rich girl with an evil mom who we're not supposed to know is evil because of her red herring mustachioed boyfriend, but she's always wearing red, so of course she's a villain. And then Vincent D'Onofrio's Kingpin shows up, and he seems like a parody of himself, even though the Netflix Daredevil show was excellent, and I'm just not sure I think Hawkeye is a very good series.
She thinks that she can quit her job as if she works for Goldman Sachs.
Florence Pugh provides some comic relief as Black Widow's sister, who is also an assassin. And the whole joke is, she has a Russian accent, isn't that funny? There's an episode where Hawkeye has to LARP out in the woods, and there's a fight scene in a KB Toys. The villains are a group called the Tracksuit Mafia, and their leader is this deaf chick with a fake leg. Her translator gets a big emotional death scene that made me feel nothing, because these characters are paper thin. It also has the intentionally cringe-inducing Avengers musical, which I never needed to see. Ho ho no, Hawkeye gets a 4 out of 10 from me. Next. What If is the MCU's animated anthology show, which tells alternate timeline versions of events we've already seen in the MCU films. It answers such questions as, what if Captain America was a woman? What if Killmonger was Iron Man? What if Black Panther was Star-Lord? What if Thor was even more egotistical and stupid? What if all the Avengers were just killed before they formed into a team? That was a silly episode. There's a zombie episode, but Disney Marvel is still going for a younger demographic, so Ant-Man is constantly making annoying jokes the whole time to balance out anything that might be considered scary.
Whoa, watch out! She's a man-eater! There it is! I'm doing it again!
Then near the end, the stories are intertwined and they all fight Ultron. Jeffrey Wright provides some top-tier voice acting for the character of the Watcher who narrates the show and is integrated into a few episodes.
I am the Watcher. I am your guide through these vast new realities.
The Doctor Strange episode had the most interesting concept for me. It could have even been expanded into an animated film. It's a story about grief and loss, as Steven tries to go back in the past and stop the event that kills his lover. No matter how many ways he tries to change the past, the events always end up the same, and he slowly devolves into dark magic, turning him into a twisted monstrosity. This was my favorite episode, and it hit way harder than the rest. I neither love nor hate the 3D cel-shaded animation style for this show. It works, but it doesn't compare to some of the vibrant animation in Netflix shows such as Arcane and Cyberpunk Edgerunners. I also don't enjoy it on the level of DC's animated shows. Batman the Animated Series still stands as the greatest animated comic book show of all time. R.I.P. to Kevin Conroy, the absolute legend who provided the iconic voice of Batman for a whole generation.
And it is a wonderful life.
It has its moments.
What If doesn't feel like a show that I'm going to be looking back at with nostalgia, but I think kids might enjoy it a lot more than me. I'll give What If a 5 out of 10. It doesn't do anything for me, but I'm not gonna hate on it either. As far as animated comic book shows, it's average.
What if?
Now let's ask the question, what if I just didn't watch any of these shows? Would my life be any different? There might be better ways to spend the limited time I have on this planet than by watching a bunch of comic book shows for babies. Ranking all of these shows on the tier list, I would give the Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special and the Werewolf by Night Special a B tier placement, with a slight preference for Werewolf by Night. I think these are fine additions to the streaming service, and if they do one each year, they could build up some rewatchable programming. She-Hulk isn't quite bad enough to go in the F tier. It's one step above the worst things I've ever seen. It goes in the E tier. Ms. Marvel goes in the C tier. It's not something I love, but then again, it would be weird if I said a show about a teenage girl becoming a superhero was an S tier for me. I'll place Moon Knight in the B tier, a little higher than Ms. Marvel, but the CG towards the end was so bad that it kind of ruined the ending for me. Hawkeye is a D. At least with Ms. Marvel, I went in knowing it was a show about a superhero fangirl, but Hawkeye was just misleading advertising. Also, didn't it seem weird when Hawkeye brought his 22-year-old girlfriend to meet his wife and family that they just all hung out without any conflict? What If I'd also place in the C tier? I'm actually putting it lower than Ms. Marvel, because it was a grab bag of ideas that didn't all work for me. Going back even further, Loki would be in the B tier, above Moon Knight. It's my favorite Marvel show so far, but it ended way too abruptly just to set up Kang for the third Ant-Man movie. And the future Avengers movies too. Yet another time when a comic book franchise was more interested in setting up the next thing than making the thing you're watching stand up on its own. I thought the Falcon and the Winter Soldier was at its best when the villains Baron Zemo and US Agent were on screen, and the title characters didn't have as much chemistry and charisma as I would have liked. I'll put the Falcon and the Winter Soldier in the high C tier, above Ms. Marvel. The politics behind this one were rather bland and a little too on the nose. If you're looking for a good political show, watch Andor instead. WandaVision is a low C tier for me. Emulating classic sitcoms was a fun idea, but I'd rather just watch classic sitcoms. Bah humbug. What a bunch of mid-tier mush Marvel has been cranking out to fill up their streaming service. It's content for the sake of content, and overall I'm not a huge fan. All that I have left to say is, have a wonderful winter solstice, a crazy Kwanzaa, a happy Hanukkah, and a very Merry Christmas, you filthy animals.